You know what Shirley Temple's mother used to say to her?
No.
Before every take. Before every take, this is God's truth, Michael. She used to say, "Sparkle, Shirley." Well, I don't think I'm going to sparkle tonight, Michael. But I have my stick, and if you try one of those in-depth interviews, you ought to know that I'm armed.
That was Orson Welles laying down the law. He liked interviewers to know their place. When we first met, he looked in despair at the sheet of paper I held in my hand. "What's that?" he said. "My questions," I said. "Throw them away, and we'll talk instead. Much better," he said. And it was. Who was I to argue with the man who at 26 made and starred in Citizen Kane, a film constantly voted the best movie ever made, and who followed that landmark with The Magnificent Ambersons, The Lady from Shanghai, and Touch of Evil to consolidate his reputation as one of the giants of cinema. Here's a reminder of the film which for many remains his greatest achievement.
Galleons of Spain off Turkey coast. Is that really your idea of how to run a newspaper?
I don't know how to run a newspaper, Mr. Thatcher. I just try everything I can think of.
Charge, you know perfectly well there's not the slightest proof that this armada's off the Jersey
Hello,
coast.
Mr. Bernstein.
Excuse me, Mr.
Can you
Kane.
prove it isn't?
This just
Mr.
came
Bernstein,
in.
I'd like you to meet Mr. Thatcher.
How do you do, Mr. Thatcher?
Leland,
Hello.
Mr. Thatcher, my ex-guardian.
From
We have
Cuba.
no secrets from our readers, Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Thatcher is one of our most devoted readers. He knows what's wrong with every copy of the Inquirer since I took over. Read the cable.
Girls delightful in Cuba, stop. Could send you prose poems about scenery, but don't feel right spending your money. Stop. There is no war in Cuba. Signed, Wheeler. Any answer?
Yes, dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems. I'll provide the war.
That's fine, Mr. Kane.
Yes, I rather liked myself. Send it right away.
I came to see you about this campaign of yours.
Orson Welles spent the rest of his life trying to avoid talking about Citizen Kane. Indeed, as you're about to see, he hated talking about any of his movies, but he loved talking. And there was much to say. He was and is a remarkable figure in 20th century culture. He revolutionized American theater. He terrified the nation with his War of the Worlds broadcast. He made cinema history. He was a political animal, a friend of President Roosevelt's, a speechwriter and commentator. He married Rita Hayworth, had an affair with Judy Garland, and a deep and close relationship with Marlene Dietrich. He was an accomplished magician, a mind reader, and a bullfighter. He was, as a friend once described him, a multitude of a man. He was also, I think, the most fascinating talker of them all. What you're going to see now are the highlights of an interview I did with him in 1974. It was the time of Watergate, and I've been asking him his views on the stature of politicians.
I don't think politicians are natural crooks.
Not all of them.
No, I don't think most of them are. I think they are actors. And actors are neither men nor women. Actors belong to a third sex. Actors are actors, and one aspect of it is the political game. But that kind of acting is not lying, as long as it refers to and reflects and exalts the essential, commonly held ideals of a culture. Those performances are part of our culture, even though they are performances, even though some of the actors themselves may be cynical about their performance. But what we have now cannot be excused in those terms.
But you said only the last time that you wouldn't mind the job of President of the United States. Do I take it that you're still in candidacy?
Well, they haven't been burning up the wires.
No.
I'm not really in a position at this point of time to state that I am ready for candidacy of the president.
Well, one thing that amused me about that really was I was looking on television the other night, and you had the vice president designate, whose name I can't remember now.
Ford.
Ford, that's right.
Yes,
Gerald Ford.
should be easy.
Gerald Ford,
Yeah.
that's right, yes. And
Gerald is the tough part of it.
That's right, yeah.
We call him Jerry.
Jerry. And he was some before some of that kind of preliminary Senate investigatory committee. And he was saying the most extraordinary things about, you can investigate me, you can investigate my children, you can talk to my bank manager, you know, you can look into me and there's nothing wrong with me. I'd love to be there, actually, if you ever got to the position of presidents of the United States where they were investigating you. I mean...
You mean me?
You. Yeah. I mean,
but I've been investigated over and over again by the Americans, by all kinds of American committees and
really?
FBI and everybody. Sure. It's you know, it's one of our favorite indoor and outdoor sports. What else were we doing in the doctor's office during Ellsberg's trial? But investigated.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
My trouble during the investigation period, what I was being investigated a lot was during the time of the anti-American McCarthy period, you see. And I never got to testify because I kept begging to be allowed to. And this was a line of argument that nobody else took. And it absolutely stopped them. I said, oh, please let me go and explain why I'm not a communist. Well, we'll let you know, you know. Then one of them earlier in the day, there was one congressional committee which was run by a fellow called Dyes, who ended up in jail for one of those minor crimes that seem to tempt our people in elective office. And he was a strong patriot. He wrapped himself in the American flag as fully as it was possible to do. And he had an Un-American, or whatever it was called, Affairs Committee, long before McCarthy started. And he sent a few louts over to see me in my office in Hollywood. And they were particularly uneducated and dumb, and they fell into a marvelous trap. Because they said to me, are you a card-carrying communist? Of course, I've never been even faintly pro-communist, but I am on the progressive side, as I imagine you've guessed. But I said, will you define what a communist is? And this is when they fell in the trap. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, just, I want to answer your question honestly. How can I answer your question if you don't tell me what you mean? Well, what's communist? Well, I guess it's where whatever you make goes to the government. I said, well, I'm 86% communist. The rest is capitalist. That's the income tax that one pays to America.
Have you ever been bugged?
Oh, yes, but that was by Harry Cohen. That was by the head of a movie studio in my office. And he had me bugged in such an obvious way that I used to come in. I had a radio program every week in those days. And I used to come into my office in the morning. I'd say, good morning, everyone. This is Orson Welles' office, welcoming you to another day of fun and laughter and so on. And then when the day would end, it says, is Orson Welles signing off? We'd play a little music and so on. And treated it like a radio show. And Harry Cohen got rather angry about that because he thought the buggy ought to take it seriously.
Yeah. Buggy.
Yes. When I ran the federal theaters in the days of the WPA, we were all bugged, of course, and our phones were in those days. It's hard to imagine anything more primitive than Watergate or the disappearing tapes that we're faced with today, but it was so primitive then that you could hear buzzing and screeching on the phone when they were listening. And as a result of one of those operations, I put on Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, and a congressman got up on the floor and said it is a known fact that Orson Welles is producing and acting in a play by the notorious communist Christopher Marlowe. You know, and but that took a lot of electronic work to get that information.
Yeah. The reason that you've worked and lived for such a long time in Europe.
Not to avoid McCarthy.
No. It's been because the work's been there.
Yes,
this sort of
really. Yes, really, because the work's been in Europe. And because I like living on this side of the Atlantic very much, but I like living in America too. I'm not a refugee, either politically or emotionally from my country. And I'm neither very hot about nationalistically inclined, because I hate that in anybody. I do truly believe that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel.
Yes.
And I don't feel that way, but I'm very happy in America. But it happens that America is not as happy with me as I am with it. You know?
Yeah. Why do you, in fact, live in Spain at present?
I don't live in Spain. I'm shooting a picture there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
but you spend a lot of time there, don't you?
Not as much now as I did before. I was there, again, because like the fruit pickers, I go where the work is, you know. No, I don't live in Spain at all. I don't have an establishment there.
No. But I mean,
yes, I like Spain because I'm old-fashioned and it's an old-fashioned country. But I hadn't been in Spain when I talked to you for a long time. And I've been there now. And in the last 6 months, it's joined the glory of the present world to such an extent that you don't know whether you're in Los Angeles or not in half the streets of Madrid.
Really?
And a great deal of the grace and pleasure of life, at least in the big cities, is gone.
Yes. Are you, in fact, also still interested? I know it was a passion of yours in previous years in bullfighting.
Yes, but I'm less. I'm interested in what I remember.
You don't?
I don't like it much anymore.
Why is that?
Well, two things. First of all, bullfighting, as somebody once said very well, is indefensible and irresistible. And it is irresistible when everything is as it ought to be, both with the beast, the sacrificial beast, and with the brave man who meets that brave animal for a ritualistic encounter. I'm not going to go into all that mystique, which has been pretty worn out by now. The fact is that it has become an industry which depends on its existence with the tourist trade. So it's become folkloric. And I hate anything which is folkloric, you know. But I haven't turned against bullfighting because it needs a lot of Japanese in the front row to keep going. And it does. But I've turned against it for very much the same reason that my father, who was a great hunter, suddenly stopped hunting. He said, I've killed enough animals and I'm ashamed of myself. And I was a bad tororito, you know, for a while myself, and I've seen too many hundreds of bullfights, thousands of them, I suppose, and wasted a lot of my life now that I look back on it. And although it's been a great education to me in human terms and in many other ways, I begin to think that I've seen enough of those animals die.
Was it a waste? It's odd you should say that when you look back. I would have thought it was a very exciting...
It was all of that, but wasn't I living second-hand through the lives of those toreros who were my friends?
Yes.
Wasn't I living and dying second-hand? Wasn't there something finally voyeuristic about it? I suspect my afición. I still go to bullfights. I'm not totally reformed, and I can't ask for the approval of the people who have very good reasons to argue about stopping it. And by the way, almost all Spanish intellectuals have been against bullfighting for the last 150 years. There are very few. Lorca is one of the few Spanish intellectuals who ever approved of bullfighting. No, waste, you ask me. Waste because I wasn't doing anything.
Yes.
My little short period of doing it was just for the fun of it. As a kid, I didn't think I was going to grow up to be the Belmonte of my generation, and the rest of my life that I spent among bull breeders and bullfighters was enormous fun. But what have I extracted from it that's of any value to anybody?
What were the qualities in them, though, that you admired, that attracted you to them?
Well, of course, you know, there are two kinds of people who follow the bulls, as they say in Spanish. There are those people who follow because they love the bullfighters, and there is a very small minority who are interested in the bulls. And I was always most interested in the bulls. Now, that will be incomprehensible to an English audience, that somebody could be fundamentally interested in the animal who is going to be killed. But my interest in bulls was like the interest of somebody who is very keen and very knowledgeable about horses. I know a great deal about bulls, and am much more interested in them than in the men who fight them, in spite of the fact that some of the dearest friends I have in my life have been bullfighters.
It was something, of course, you shared this passion with millions of other people, but one other very famous American, Hemingway.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet him?
He was a very close friend of mine.
Was he?
Yeah. I knew him on and off for many years. We had a very strange relationship. He was, I never belonged to his clan because I made fun of him. And nobody ever made fun of Hemingway.
Mm.
But I did. And he took it, but he didn't like me to do it in front of the club. We met in a projection of a movie which he had made and which he wanted me to narrate. And he had written the commentary. This is many years ago.
Yeah.
And we hadn't seen each other. This is a dark projection room, and I was reading the text. And I said, is it really necessary to say this? Do you think wouldn't it be better to just see the picture? And things like that. And then I heard this growl from the darkness, you know. Some damn faggot who runs an art theater trying to tell me how to write narration and so on. So I began to camp it up. I thought, if that's what I'm dealing with, I said, oh, Mr. Hemingway, you think because you're so big and strong and have hair on your chest that you got to bully me, you see. So this great figure stood up and swung at me. So I swung at him. Now you have the picture of the Spanish Civil War being projected on a screen, and these two heavy figures swinging away at each other and missing most of the time. The lights came up, and we looked at each other and burst into laughter and became great friends. Not a friendship that was renewed every year, but over many years at different times.
Yes.
And I saw him in the last year in which he was still entirely in control of himself, again, quite a lot. But we never discussed bullfighting because we, except on the subject of Ordóñez, we disagreed profoundly on too many points. And he thought he invented it, you know.
Yes.
He really did think he invented it.
Yes.
Of course, maybe he did.
His book, of course, is still
It's
a
superb,
magnificent.
and it's a superb book. He's a great, great, great artist. My admiration for... I was enormously fond of him as a man, too, because the thing you never get from his books was his humor.
Yes.
There's hardly a word of humor in a Hemingway book because he's so tense and solemn and dedicated to what is true and good and all that. Mm. But when he relaxed, he was riotously funny. Mm. And that was the level that I loved about him. And I enjoyed being with him. I used to go out and keep him company when he went duck shooting in Venice in the autumns. I have many strange memories of him like that.
Yeah.
And I was enormously fond of him. But as an artist, I think that it's really... there are very few important writers, with the exception of Novikov, who have not been influenced to some degree by him. I think it's impossible to write the same as we did before he wrote.
And yet, do you not sense now that he's become, over the past 10 years, an old-fashioned sort of figure?
He's come back again, I think.
Yeah.
My hunch is, I don't know in England, of course, because these things vary in different countries. In America, he was in total eclipse for the last 10 years, but the sun is rising again, critically for him, a little bit. Mm. Yeah. He's been dead long enough. I think it's mainly true, isn't it, that writers do go into total eclipse right after their death.
Yes.
I wonder why that is, but it seems to be true.
He was ultimately, of course, a tragic figure, wasn't he? I mean, in that his end was complete counterpoint to all that he stood for and written about.
He was sick, but he did talk about suicide. You know, his father killed himself with a gun in the same way, and he talked to me about it several times.
Really?
In a sort of obsessive way.
Yes.
But he was a sick man. He wasn't merely he was not well mentally. You know? Yes. He's not to be judged as himself. In other words, the Hemingway we are talking about did not choose his death.
Yes.
He might have, but he wasn't that man.
Yeah. Do you have any heroes?
Oh, yes.
Who you do?
Many.
Really?
Yes, many.
Who are they?
I suppose there are the, you know, in England, Churchill is, you know, I know he's a little out of fashion with a lot of young people, you know, who send him up a lot, and I'm abject hero, worshipper of Winston's. And I think the greatest man I ever met was George Marshall.
Really?
everything that I would human being, like to be myself or like everybody to be. He was just...
Yeah.
One night, we were at a big dinner, a banquet. All the brass. The war was still on. I was the only civilian who was going to sit on the dais, as we call it in America. And there was the admirals and everybody else, and Mr. Roosevelt was going to be wheeled in a moment, and we were waiting, and it was in the Mayflower Hotel, and the door opened, and a GI looked in, just by accident. He opened the door, and he saw George Marshall, who was the highest-ranking officer in the world. He said, "You're General Marshall." Now, Marshall didn't know anybody was watching this. I was, because everybody was having drinks and talking. I just happened to be watching. He said, "Yeah, come in, son." And he went off in the corner with the boy, who was an ordinary GI, and sat talking with him for 15 minutes, and sent the boy home. Now, there are not many generals of the Army who could do that with simplicity and without the slightest hint of demagoguery or playing. He didn't think one of us was admiring him for being a human being. And he was such a human being that that little boy from the prairies of Kansas or wherever instantly saw that he could talk to him without embarrassment. As he could never have talked to his major. Or to General MacArthur. You know?
To Patton, though.
Oh, certainly not to Patton, not unless he had his guard up.
I asked you that question about heroes, actually, because I know to a lot of people that you know, if I asked them that question, they would say that you were their hero.
I can't imagine why, but I love hearing it.
You love hearing that,
I sincerely don't know why. I sincerely can't see how anybody could make a hero of me. But
as I've never yet been called it, I must ask you this, and you've been called it many times. You've been called a genius many times.
Yes, it's just one of those words, you know. It's one of those words. I suppose there have only been 2 or 3 geniuses in a century. We all know who they are, you know.
Really?
I suppose, yes. What, Einstein and Picasso and somebody in China we haven't heard about, you know.
So you don't accept the...
Oh, I accept anything I get. but between friends, you know, there aren't many of them.
No.
And I really wouldn't want to try to edge my way into an elevator that for geniuses only, going up, you know.
Well, let's go back. You were talking earlier about experts and their idea. I suppose you take your experts. That would be film critics would call themselves experts, one imagine. Now they've judged a film of yours twice running the best film ever made. Now, how do you...
That shows you how crazy experts are. No, I think it shows you how fundamentally sound film criticism is in this day and age. No, I don't. I never talk about critics because there isn't anything to be said about them. If they criticize you, anything you say is sour grapes, and if they like what you do, you should shut up. You know, there's no way of criticizing the critics.
Do they ever wound you?
Deeply, yes. I can remember every bad notice I've ever had. Really? I can remember one I got when I was 18 years old in Salt Lake City, when I played Marshbanks with Catherine Cornell, and I was described as a sea calf whining in a basso profundo. And I'm sure it's an absolutely accurate description of that performance, which must have been abominable. But it still goes through my head before I go to sleep at night, along with 1,000 other litanies of the same kind. I have a misfortune, is that it isn't out of modesty. It's, I suppose, some form of masochism. If so, it's the only thing that I'm masochistic about. But I do remember all the bad notices, and I do forget or take not very seriously the good ones.
Yes. And the other curious thing is that you genuinely do not like talking about your work in movies at all.
No, because it's done. I really don't. You know that. That isn't because we've got cameras on us. My family has never heard me say a word about any picture I've ever made.
I just find that very, very curious indeed. Because, you know, the number of people I have interviewed, film directors, film actors particularly, I mean, that's all they can talk about.
Well, I'm sure they could talk about things, but they like to talk about it. A lot of directors and actors like to run their movies. You know, their idea of a happy night at home is to turn on the projector and see one of their pictures again, you know. And I can't think of anything more horrifying, you know, because you can't change it.
Yes.
What can you do about it?
Yes.
There it is,
Yes.
forever. And if you're, you know, if you're a writer and you've written a bad chapter and they're going to bring out another edition, if you're lucky enough of your works, you get to fix up that chapter. Nothing you can do about a movie. There it is, locked in forever.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. But of course, you will talk generally about movies, not your own about the industry.
Yes, I'm not as interesting about it as I'd like to be, though, because I don't see enough movies.
No. But I was just wondering about the changes that you've seen in the industry since you first started making movies in Hollywood. Have been this most radical.
Do you think it's still an industry, Michael? Really an industry?
It's not an industry like it used to be, that's for sure.
And I wonder if it really was. I think it was I think it always was show business, and that when there were big studios, which still existed when I went to Hollywood, but were in their very last days, as golden age big studios, I think they were pretending to be factories, and it was still show business. It's true they were grinding them out and all that, but it's show business. The true industrial process cannot be as helter-skelter and idiotic as every form of show business is. Otherwise, you know, every car we'd get in would break down after the second block. I can't believe the rest of the people are as stupid as we are.
But how do you get the product then if it's all as mad as that? I mean, in those days,
it sort of happens, you know. Movies are terribly easy to make. It's much harder to put on a play than a movie. Oh, yes. You see, because what's hard to do is to make a very good movie.
Yes.
A good movie is even easy to make, because if you have a good cameraman, if you have the cast that happens to be right, if you have a story that happens to be vaguely interesting, that is the art form that works in our day and age. So that it would be very hard to write a great play in blank verse today, but I think it was pretty easy in Elizabethan days to write a good verse play.
Yes.
Not a great one, but a good one. Damn near impossible now, because it has nothing to do with our culture.
Yes.
But somehow a good movie gets itself made even by a lot of second-rate people.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
A very good one is, of course, another thing.
Yeah. And if you look back at those days in Hollywood when you were first operating over there, and it really was the dream factory, wasn't it? And so when you look back, I mean, are you nostalgic about those days, or were they just comic relief?
I loved them.
Did you?
You know, I thought it was great.
Really?
So I never belonged to it. You see, when I came, I was this terrible maverick that they all, you know, I was sort of the, you know, 30 years ahead of my time, whatever it is. There was a sort of ghost of a Christmas future. There was the one beatnik. You know, there was this guy with a beard who was going to do it all by himself. You know, I represented the terrible future of what was going to happen to that town. So I was hated and despised. I had all kinds of friends among the real dinosaurs who were awfully nice to me.
Really?
Yes, and I had a very good time. But I believe that I have looked back too optimistically on Hollywood, because my daughter has a group of books about Hollywood that she bought. I don't know why, probably vainly looking for references of her father in them. And I took to reading them lately, and I realized how many great people that town has destroyed since its earliest beginnings. How almost everybody of merit was destroyed or diminished, and how the few people who were good who survived, what a great minority they were. And I suddenly thought to myself, why do I look so affectionately on that town? It was because it was funny, and it was gay, and it was an old-fashioned circus, and everything that we're nostalgic about. Made it funny and gay when it was really happening.
Yes.
But really it was a brutal place.
Yes.
And when I take my own life out of it and see what they did to other people, I see that the story of that town is a dirty one, and its record is bad.
Yes. And what about the stars, the great stars they had in those days? That, I mean, people always say we don't have nowadays.
Well,
we don't. That's
no.
true, because they're not processed in the way that they used to.
I don't think that they don't exist.
They don't exist.
They don't exist.
Well, why is that? Why should
Because
that
they
be?
exist, they're singers. In the old days, the greatest thing in the world to be was a movie star.
Yes.
Today, the greatest thing in the world is to be a pop singer. There will never be a great star unless the greatest thing in the world to be is that kind of star.
I see.
At the end of the last century and before the First World War, the greatest thing in the world,
Yes.
and people used to faint in the streets when they saw an opera singer. And then there came the movie stars. I think, you see, I think we all, any form of entertainment only exists because it corresponds to a moment in time, you know? So that, of course, there are actors who are as good, or as remarkable, or
Yes.
as space-displacing, or whatever,
Yes.
however you want to describe a star.
Yes.
But the world doesn't think being a movie star is the everlasting end.
No.
And it
No.
used to, and that's why
That's
they
right.
don't exist.
That's right. I was going to ask you, in effect, it brought us right back to the beginning of our conversation. Were they, in fact, just great stars, or were they just part of an illusion?
They were great. They were great. I think that Keaton and Garbo, my goodness, Cagney. I won't talk about Bogart because everybody does. I loved him very much, but I think we can get along without talking about Bogart for about 3 years, and his shade will be relieved.
Yes.
But Cagney, in my view, was maybe the greatest actor who ever appeared in front of the camera.
Really?
Yes.
James Cagney?
Yes.
Why was that? What was this? What makes you say
First
that?
of all, he broke every rule about movie acting. He came, you see, the first thing that every stage actor says is, I learned to act to the camera because you have to do less. You can't do Laddie what you do at the National Theater. You have to act for the camera and so on. Cagney came on as though we were playing to an audience of 4,500 people. He acted at the top of his bent, and he never hammed for one moment, thus proving my point that hamming is not overacting. It is false acting. It's fakery.
Yeah.
And there's not a fake minute in a Cagney movie. Please have a season of him
Yeah.
and study what he was.
In fact, I was thinking the other day about the people I haven't interviewed who I'd love to, and I think he comes
He
somewhere.
won't come.
I know. He's
He
a
won't come. He won't.
complete recluse now, isn't he?
Yes. Well, no, but he won't come in front of a camera.
No.
He goes out and does his thing, and he goes to Hollywood for 6 months every year. He sees his old cronies and so on. But in all his life, you know, he was like Tracy and a lot of people. He never went to a nightclub once, never went out. You know, he was a totally invisible. You know, Garbo wasn't the only one.
No.
There was just a small group who went to Macambo and slugged the photographers and did all that scene, you know. That was the rest of them were homebodies, you know.
When you talk, it depends what they got at home, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. When you talked to me last time, you said something about, I think your friend Akim Tamirov said about acting, either the camera loves you or
yes,
the camera
it's a
doesn't.
great thing.
I presume that was true, more true about Garbo than anybody else, wasn't it?
Yes, I suppose that anybody.
Mm.
And of course, it's a great mystery. I don't know if you've ever seen those commercials she did.
No?
When I went to Stockholm years ago, they showed me in their film institute there 2 commercials for bread that she made to be shown in movie theaters. And there was this great galumphing Swedish cow having a picnic. There was nothing to show you that you were looking at the most divine creature who would ever be on the screen. And 2 years later, she was Greta Garbo. Now, I have no explanation whatsoever for that.
Surgery.
No, just I have no idea what there is about the camera, what that box does,
Yes.
what made Cooper so thrilling on the screen and convincing. And when you visit Gary Cooper on the set and you'd see him do a take, as I did a couple of times to go out to lunch with him, I'd stand and watch, and they'd finish the take, and the director would say, "Okay, that's a print." I'd say, "They can't use that." I'd say to myself, "That's nothing." Then you'd see the rushes, magic, you know, showing that it isn't There isn't any rule at all that explains it.
No. Can I ask you, finally, Orson, as we get toward the end, how many films you're working on at present? Because you seem to be juggling with about 4 or 5 whenever I meet you.
Yes, I am always, because the hope is that one of them will work out. We're finishing a picture now, or will be. I'll be going into final photography with it very shortly, which is called The Other Side of the Wind, which is about a lot of which has been filmed, most of which, and is about the last day in the life of an old movie director.
Oh, yes.
An older movie director than I am.
Oh.
Everybody will think it's autobiographical, but it's not.
I saw a bit about this. Well, it was described as your first erotic movie.
Yes, well, I don't know what somebody, I think I know how that happened. There was a press conference in behalf of some project of mine, and it was clear that there wasn't any copy being given to a group of hard-working journalists. And having been a journalist myself, I thought I'd invent something.
Oh, I see.
It's sheer fakery.
Sheer fakery. I wonder if he knows. Yeah. But why, in fact, do you have such a schedule? Why do you keep working so hard? There's an awful compulsion, it seems to me, in you to work all the time.
Oh,
no.
No? Oh, no, I think you've put your finger on a basic failing of all lazy people. They have to work too hard or they won't do anything at all.
Yes.
Yes. Once I stretch out in a hammock, you'll never hear from me again. As I like it that way.
Could I take you as that is your last line tonight, or is there? Could I ask you, is there any one single line at all in any play you've ever done, any movie, anything you've ever read, that you really sort of believed and thought that's true, that's good, that's really what I'm about?
What I'm about, I don't know. Plato told us that we should know ourselves, and the object of every artist, good, bad, or indifferent, is a lifelong inquiry into that subject, and his work is testimony to that effort, that I'm in no position to sum myself up, and I would be appalled if the truth could be offered to me at this moment.
You carry on inquiring?
Yes.
Orson Welles, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.